That's our new warning system with. All right. Welcome to SPAT Seminar 1. This is our first seminar in a strand of many to help prepare you to do your SPAT. And each time we meet, we'll have another one of these. I will record them. You'll be able to access them and access additional information that is part of the Google Slides. I'll also make the Google Slides available to you. So in this very first seminar, what we're going to be talking about is the first section of our SPAT, which is all really about the classroom context. It's about the learners that you're going to be teaching and the community and school and classroom context that you find yourself in. Because while content is really important, you can't teach content unless you know the people you're teaching it to. You have to understand the connection between who your learners are and the context, and the content that you're teaching. So that's really what we're going to focus on today. We'll also talk about reasons, like what is the purpose of the SPAT and why we have it. So first we're going to talk about, or Jennifer Snow, our interim dean, is going to talk to us a little bit about what is an SPAT. And I'll just give a little introduction as well. This is what we call the Standard Performance Assessment for Teachers. That is what SPAT stands for. All of the teachers that are being certified from Boise State University engage in this. This is your capstone activity. It is really designed to bring together or integrate everything you've learned in your program about planning, about assessment, and about reflection. So I'm going to go ahead and have Dr. Snow talk to us.
At Boise State, and I want to take a minute to review the purpose of your standard performance assessment for teaching. We as liaisons like to model for you what we ask you to do as teachers, and that vein, we want to ensure that you dig into your unit planning template and note the larger purposes of this performance assessment for your program. We hope that you engage the rigor and complexity of the template, because this assessment is a space where we determine your competency for taking the knowledge, skills, and dispositions you've learned and apply them in this specific context, so that we might also assess your capacity for transferring these skills to other contexts. There are multiple measures and criteria for this performance assessment. We look forward to supporting your development across all domains. Be sure to have fun and ask questions. What you do here should help prepare you for the rest of your career.
All right, thank you to Dr. Snow. And we're going to now move on to, a timeline, a suggested timeline. And so I'm going to let you listen to Carolyn when I send this out to you. She talks about the timeline. But the thing I want to say about this is there's a couple of things to consider. So this is kind of an ideal world timeline that we're going to suggest for you. And that's in these first 4 to 5 weeks, we will complete our planning section in phase 1 of our template. Week 6 to 8, we'll have you complete your planning in phase 2. Then you're going to teach your unit and collect your data. And then at the end, you'll analyze your data and write up some reflections that you have about this. Now, when I say the ideal world, it's because we don't all necessarily have 14 weeks to do our SPATs. So if you are a person who, for instance, started your endorsement placement your first 3 or 4 weeks, you might be starting a little bit later. And that's fine. You're still going to be able to get it done. Just know that you'll have to compress these steps. So you might not have 4 or 5 weeks to do the planning for phase 1, and instead that may get compressed into 2 weeks. Okay, your 6 to 8 weeks for phase 2 might get compressed into 1 week. So again, you'll still be having all the support along the way, and you'll actually still be able to, I would suggest, contact your mentor teacher in your regular placement if you're not seeing them yet, and decide on your unit topic and get started, even if you're in your endorsement placement first. Vice versa, if you're going to spend your last 4 weeks somewhere else, then you want to make sure that you are definitely finished with analyze and reflect before you leave. Could you still be working on it? Potentially, yes. I mean, you still could be writing up your results, correct? Those last 4 weeks. But if you wanted to get it off your plate and not have to be thinking about that when you go into your full-time endorsement placement, some of you will, some of you won't, again, then you might want to push it forward. So the timeline that we're talking about here is definitely flexible. If you're a secondary candidate and you're going to be switching, you're in, like you have a major endorsement area or a 8-week placement, again, you're going to be compressing. So think about how you compress. You want to think about which one of your endorsement placements you might want to focus your SPAT. I always encourage people to do it in the space where they're there the longest or their major area of endorsement. So for you all, that's elementary K-8. So I am suggesting that this is something you do in your elementary placement and not your 4-week middle school placement. Secondary candidates as well, it's the same idea. I would not do it in a 6 or 8-week placement. If you're somebody who switches placements in the middle, 8 weeks, then you're going to have to make a decision. Because you do that analyze and reflect piece at the end, it might behoove you to do it at the beginning so that you could be doing some of the write-up later. When you receive this, when you are looking at this and you have the Google Slides, you can hear what Carolyn has to say about it as well. All right, there's some tools that you could that we have provided you in the field guide that we want you to consider tools for success. So we have very carefully crafted and designed directions inside of our field guide for you. And you'll notice that the directions, any templates that you use for a particular section, and the rubrics are all color coded. So we've got 3 parts to the SPAT. We have part 1, which is going to be the part we start working on, which is planning. And you'll notice that all of the things you need to look at are all coded with this light orange color. And then when we move into the assessment analysis section, you're going to see they're color coded the same, as well as the reflection directions and the reflection rubric. So when you look at our materials that are in your professional year folder and can be found in your field guides, you're going to see that color coding. These are here to help you. These are your directions. This is how you're going to be scored by looking at the rubrics. So I would never suggest writing up sections of your SPAT without looking at the rubric first. It's going to really help you to understand what is it you really need to be successful. And the directions as well are doing the same thing. You don't want to leave out a whole section that's clearly indicated as a need in the directions. So pay attention to those materials because I think they definitely set you up for success. All right, so we're going to start now on this section, and we're going to talk about your context, and we're going to listen to Dr. Beamer talk to us about context.
As another part of your unit planning, what we want you to consider is the context in which you are teaching. And by context, I'm not just speaking to your direct classroom setting, but the larger building as a whole and the community that surrounds the school building that you're working in. We don't just want you to look at numbers here. While we are asking you to gather those numbers, we want you to consider what those numbers tell you about how you specifically are going to inform your instruction for the supports needed within your individual context. This will look different from every SPAT unit that we receive at the university level, because you are all among such different contexts, even within one individual school building. So while you are looking at these numbers and you're gathering specific information, please consider, how can I purposefully and intentionally use this information about my students in order to inform my instruction to better support their individual student needs. Consider your context, who you're speaking to as a whole, the community that surrounds your individual school building, and really try to utilize that information to support you, not only in better understanding your students, but in better understanding how to support those students and how to inform your instruction and your practices moving forward as a professional educator.
Right. So what Lisa's really talking about here is something that we dug into in our internship. So this is the part of the SPAT you should feel so confident about, because when we did our inquiry projects, the very first thing we did was to engage in what some of us called the context assignment. It was the very first section of your inquiry project. All of you created slides to share at our share out time, our inquiry roundtables with each other. And your first slide talked about your school context, your community school and classroom context. So much of this information, if you are still teaching in the same school building, guess what? You already have the information for the community context and the school context. You need to get the information for your classroom context. If you have switched schools and you did your inquiry project and your internship in a different school, then you're going to need to maybe seek out, let's say you could find maybe a group of student teachers, a group of others that have been in your, a group of maybe interns. Because our interns that are in the building where you are at now are digging into this. Maybe it's a place where you could do some collaboration and sharing with any interns that you see in your building, since they're investigating this same thing right now. So let's talk about what specifically, we'll talk a little bit more specifically about what goes into this section as we go through the template. Right now, I'm going to go through now the very first parts of the SPAT template with you, and we're going to talk specifically about what we want to see happen in each section. Okay, so the first part of the template, right after the introduction section, and we'll look at that in a minute, it talks about asking you to give an overview of the unit and the important concepts that will be learned. This is generally a narrative. It talks about, I'm teaching addition and subtraction, single digits, blah. Some important concepts students will learn in this unit are. Okay, so it's pretty simple. I like to talk in this section a little bit about maybe the unit that came before, so that it helps you to understand maybe any kind of prior knowledge you've built up as they go into this unit. The second part asks you to talk about how they fit with big ideas in the larger curriculum. I have hooked on this slide 3 different articles about what a big idea is. Okay. The big idea is something that goes across the curriculum. It can go across grade levels. It's the larger big idea that you're trying to teach. So for instance, if I was teaching something like westward expansion, or if I was teaching something like explorers, these are all kind of units that lend themselves to ideas about big ideas like immigration, change, migration. Those are big ideas. Students are going to see them over and over as they go through the curriculum. In the articles that I have linked here, they're going to give you some examples based on content areas. So if you're a person who's working in English language arts, or you're working in science, or you're working in math, you're going to see some examples of some big ideas, and you're going to listen to and you're going to read some information about really what qualifies that big idea. The other thing you could consider in this part is things like enduring understandings, which are also big ideas in my mind. The other thing it asks you to do is come up with some essential questions. I've said 2 here. Sometimes there's really one big essential question. Sometimes there's 3. Play around with this a little bit. Try to come up with at least 2 essential questions come out of a big idea, and it forms and guides. It's like the guiding question for your unit. It's not a factoid. It's again, in this next slide right here, I've provided you some resources so that you can understand, how do I form an essential question from a big idea? How do I get from that big idea or enduring understanding to some essential questions that will guide my entire unit? It's going to keep your thinking in the higher levels. It's going to give kids this overarching reason for really learning this content. And hopefully when you're done, the kids will see how what they just learned connects to these bigger and larger ideas that will repeat over time for them. Okay, the intro to your unit asks for some very specific demographics. So this is where you're going to put your name, your school, what is the content area that you're teaching in. In secondary, you're going to give the course name. Maybe you're going to focus in, and often secondary teachers will ask about, do I have to do this in every period? Or maybe if you're a 5th grade or a 6th grade teacher and the kids are rotating through all of the different 5th grade course classrooms are rotating to you for the subject matter, pick one, pick a grade level. Pick a section or a period to work on if you would like. Some people like to expand out bigger, but there's really no need. You can focus on one class period if you would like to. Okay. And this is going to include some classroom demographics. And I think Lisa did a really nice job of saying, yes, we're putting numbers here, but it's really not the numbers that we're concerned with. It's the implications for your teaching based on those numbers. If I have one language learner, I have to differentiate for that language learner. If I have 6 or 7 language learners in my class, then the differentiation for the students might look different. I might really have to be heavy on my differentiation for language learners across levels, as opposed to maybe one language learner at a specific level. So it's those implications that we pull out of these numbers. This part should be fairly quick. You can look at your classroom data. Your mentor teacher can help you with these numbers, but every teacher should know. The meat of this section really is the context section here. And one of the things that I'll tell you about being successful with the SPAT is looking at the rubric and looking at the section. And one thing that's a helpful hint is developing headings. Headings really helps your liaison be able to see where you have included all the pieces of the rubric in your response. If you write one giant narrative response in this section for community, school, and classroom context, it can get lost really easy. So using headings will really help you to organize your writing in this section. Those of you who are in the same school that you were in before, you're going to do some cutting and pasting or condensing in this section because you have this information. Okay? But what you want to do is focus on the information that's applicable to this unit that you're going to be teaching. So you're not going to give every single piece of information that you gathered in your first inquiry into your context. What's important? In each of these sections, community, school, and classroom, we should see some demographic data. So we should see some quantitative data, and we should see some descriptive, narrative, qualitative data in these sections. Give us a really good feel, paint a picture for us of the school you work in, the community that you serve and work with, and your individual classroom. We are in COVID right now. So that is also part of your context. Some people have been including an extra section in here, like called COVID context. So where teachers talk about that they're moving between hybrid instruction, remote instruction, or all the kids are here face to face, but we're switching. Like it definitely is going to have an impact on your unit. So it's certainly okay under these areas or separately as its own section, whatever feels right to you, to describe COVID as it's impacting your teaching right now and how that is going to shape your unit. The thing that some people forget to do in this section, and the part that is most important, is implications for your unit. So you can put all the facts and description you want in community, school, and classroom context. If you don't understand the implications that has on your teaching, then really you're not understanding how to make a bridge between the community, school, and classroom context, or your learners, and the content. So under implications for this unit, this is where you're going to have to outline some of the implications of your teaching on the data that you just collected. And I think I gave an example right now. If you have a high level of English language learners in your classroom, then you are going to have to build a lot of what into your unit. Like you could describe some of the things you're going to have to be careful about, or some of the things you want to plan for to be really impactful to that particular group of learners. Okay, if you have 4 students who are receiving special education services and they leave the classroom, you have to think about that. Am I going to be teaching when those students are gone? How can I scaffold instruction to make this unit impactful for them? Should I be talking to the specialists that work with the student so that I can see how to best serve them in this unit? So those are the kinds of things you're going to be wanting to think about. If you work in a Title I school or a low-income school, okay, you're going to have to be thinking about how you might be interacting or asking for things from families. You have to be aware and have expectations. And at the same time, you have to say, if you have a school with some cultural diversity, how can I make that a positive aspect of this unit? How can I see that as a strength for the kids in my classroom and help them to make authentic application and connections to the content I'm about to teach? Okay. So those are all some examples of implications that you might have. You're also going to be focusing in your unit on 3 students that need specific differentiation to be successful. It could actually be that these students represent maybe a group of learners that are all going to need similar differentiation, but for this case, it's going to be 3 case studies. I want you to think about your response to intervention case study that you did and think, okay, well, I'm actually looking closely at 3 students. And the purpose of this is so that you can demonstrate your ability to plan for differentiated instruction, to plan supports for students and to enact it in your instruction, and then to see how successful you were at the end of your unit. You're going to be demonstrating that. You may not know quite yet who student A, B, and C are, but so it could be that this section, that part is not completed quite yet, and that would be okay. But eventually you're going to have to add in maybe a 2 or 3 sentences description of who student A is, why you've selected them specifically for differentiation, and what types of things you think might help them be successful. So if we look for a minute at the rubric, so we've seen the template and the headings that I am suggesting that you use, and we look here at our rubric and liaisons. As we're looking at the rubric, we're thinking about how we're going to score these. And those of you who are writers of the SPAT, you're thinking about how do I meet the criteria. On our SPATs, we do not score 2.5, 2.25, 2.75. We use whole numbers. So in these areas, you will either receive a 1, a 2, or a 3. So there's some very clear criteria that separate 2s from 3s, and you can kind of see what they are. First, okay, first, one of the things that is going to not be helpful to your planning is to provide a subjective description of your school. We do not want you to take a deficit thinking model when you think about your school. We do not want you to write about barrier after barrier or excuse after excuse why you can't succeed. We want you to be able to see, okay, these are realistic areas where I'm going to need support given my context, okay? But you're not going to use any deficit language like, well, we've got a bunch of kids that don't speak any English, and I guess they're just not going to learn this unit. Okay, so that would be like a deficit way of thinking about your learners instead of thinking about the rich cultural additions they may make. Okay, instead of a narrative that gives an objective description of what it is, it's like, here is the context. Okay, here is the description. Positive, upbeat, descriptive, realistic. Okay, but this person might leave out the implications piece. They don't make clear connections between the context and what they need to adjust in their teaching. Okay, so 2 is going to have this really great description. It's very objective, it's very thorough, but they don't make clear implications. Whereas a 3, we've got those student demographics clearly identified. We have an objective, full description of the community, school, and classroom that has both qualitative and quantitative data in it, okay? And they make a really good case for the implication of not only teaching the whole class, which is what we have right here, but also groups of students with needs outside the core curriculum. And here we have student A, B, and C. So if you are including all of those, and remember, many of you who are in the same school already have a lot of this data, even the implications, you just have to change it for your own unit. So don't reinvent the wheel, okay? But that is what we're looking for in this particular section. And liaisons that are with us tonight too, I hope this is helpful to you when you're giving advice to the students and when you are when we're reading them and giving comments and we're thinking about that. Okay, so what are your next steps? So your next steps in this very first part are to choose a topic. For many of you, you will be teaching this unit somewhere in March. Somehow right there, the middle of March, like you've got spring break, March for your school district. You have spring break on the 22nd. We don't So you won't be in your placements the week of March 22nd because your school districts are taking spring break. You're still working. I have some things you're going to be doing, some peer observations. You'll be working on some things, but your kids won't be there. So when you think about the start date of your unit, you want to consider that. Like you might not want to start the week before, go on a break, and then start teaching afterwards. So that's just one thing to consider.
Carrie, I have a question about that.
Please do.
If we are working during the student spring break, does that mean that we don't get a spring break because we'll be working?
Your spring break is Boise State spring break.
But we'll be in our placement during that time. Does that mean that we're not going to our placements during our spring break?
That'll be a choice you can make.
Okay.
But so as a student teacher, that'll be a choice you can make. You can even trade. Like for you, if it's, and I'll just be transparent, right? If you would prefer to take the March 22nd break, there's nothing to stop you from doing that. And then coming to your placement during the April break. All in all, you get 1 week as a break. So we're going to be flexible when you take that break.
So you're saying that I could potentially do the peer observations during the BSU spring break?
I'm saying you're going to have already recorded the peer observations before March 22nd. So you just might choose to give your partner feedback the week after.
Okay.
Does that make sense, Julia?
Yeah, I'll just plan ahead so I can have a break.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of saying. Yeah.
Okay.
Y'all have to plan ahead so you can have a break. And there's no really good answer. Like for student teachers, probably best case scenario is you break with your classroom, even though Boise State will break later and you keep going. Interns, it's kind of the opposite because they have class. So I'll leave it up. In our particular groups, I'm going to leave it up to you and your liaisons to figure out which week you'll take off. You only get 1 week. So you can decide.
So Sherry, can I, just to make sure that I'm clear as well. So what I hear you saying is that our interns that we're supervising probably, they need to take the Boise State break. But our student teachers, it would be probably a lot easier, or our teacher candidates, it would be a lot easier for them to probably take the break at the same time as the kids, if they're able to do that, just because then they can have an extra week of being able to get all their stuff in for their SPAT teaching it.
Yeah, it's so, I wish there was a yes. Basically, Patty, yes, with the information we have right now. And the reason I'm saying that is because Boise State will go remote after the Boise State spring break. I am going to guess that schools are still going to be in session, which means if somebody chose to go home April, whatever the week is, the spring break in April that Boise State is taking, then they would need to come back. They would need to do their COVID testing. They would need to do all of that to come back into the classroom, whichever week they're going to take it if they travel. So there's just lots of complications. And I think for us in this group, it could be that other liaisons in other groups make different decisions. But I'm going to say in our group, I feel like I would like to be flexible with candidates and let them kind of make a choice based on what's going to be best for them and their families and their situations. And I would support them either way. But I'm going to say only take 1 break. That's what I'm going to say.
No 2 weeks off.
And make sure your mentor teacher understands it and your liaison understands it. Because we're going to teach all the way through the first week in May. So keep that in mind as well.
Sherry,
yeah.
If we do take the Boise School District spring break and we travel outside of Idaho at all, are we going to have to get COVID tested when we come back?
Whatever the university requirement is at the time, you will have to follow it.
Okay.
Because they're changing all the time, I can't tell you. But yes, I mean, right now, the rule is if you travel, you have to follow the travel guidelines. So again, I don't know if it's going to be get a test 2 weeks later, or if it's quarantine. That's probably based on where you choose to travel. So whatever the university policy is and your school district policy is at the time, you'll still be required to follow it.
Sure.
So that's why it's hard for me to make a hard, fast rule for you as to which week you should take.
Sorry, Sherry. I have one more question that you may not know the answer to, but so us student teachers were allowed to go get the vaccine. Do you know how the university is going to play that into if we still have to get COVID tested and stuff?
I will definitely ask them, because
Okay,
I would assume by spring break, faculty may even have it by then. I don't know. So I'm going to bet that they're going to, that's why I'm saying things change. So, and I wish I could say exactly what it is. I always like to err on the side of caution. And I think we're in caution mode right now. I wish I could tell you it will change based on that. I would think the university is going to have to make decisions based on the vaccine as well at some point. So,
perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. But I do want you to make considerations for the kids being gone March 22nd when you plan your SPAT unit. So in our case, what we're going to be doing is I'm going to have you tonight. I'm right after this slide, I'm going to walk you through the start of this so that you all have your copies in your folder. What you're going to be doing is you're going to go into our professional year folder. You're going to make a copy of the SPAT planning template. You're going to name it your last name, SPAT plan, spring 21, and you're going to put it in your Google folder. Okay. Then you're going to complete phase 1, section 1, which is what I just showed you. And you're going to share a draft with me or your liaison. So every time you share a draft, we don't see it. We won't see it or be alerted unless you click the share button in the right-hand corner and type our email in. If you do that, I get an email notification that says, Mara is requesting feedback or something. It comes up so that I know that you're ready for me to look at it and give you some feedback, okay? And then we'll send comments for revision. And then revisions are due before we meet again in 2 weeks. So when we come back here in 2 weeks, you need to have phase 1, section 1 finished and already have revised it. Does that make sense? And even if you're in your endorsement placement right now, you can do this section for your elementary placement. You don't have to wait to complete this part. Okay, because I didn't ask you what unit you do have to know the topic, but you don't have to know the standards yet. You have to know the topic. What are the big ideas in the unit? What are your essential questions? And what is kind of an overview of it? Okay. Sometimes things happen that prevent us from finishing on my hard and fast dates. I totally understand that. I'm just trying to keep us going. If something happens and for you in your situation, it's impossible, you just let me know. Hey, here's why I'm slowing down. Okay, and then we'll work it out. Don't be embarrassed to share your drafts. This is a working process. We're going to work back and forth, back and forth, back and forth through this whole process. You're going to make an attempt. You're going to approximate the practice. You're going to get some feedback. You're going to revise. We're going to go back and forth. We will not let you submit something that we don't feel is going to pass. Okay, I'm not going to set you up to fail. Like when you submit your unit plan, you're going to feel confident, section by section by section, that you have met the criteria. Okay? All right, I'm going to now stop this. Okay, and hopefully find my screen sharing button. And we are going to come back together. And I'm going to stop the recording now so that we can just talk in our seminar groups.